I want to thank everybody for being here and for zooming in. I know how exhausted most of you are with Zoom at this point, being on multiple Zoom meetings multiple times a day for multiple hours. So again, much appreciated that you're here. We're here because we're having a lovely event to honor our undergraduate students, and specifically the students who've completed senior theses in the Department of the History of Art and Design. Each of the students worked with an advisor to conceptualize, research, and write a thesis on a topic of her own choosing. The complete papers represent the culmination of each student's undergraduate career at Pratt Institute and are clear examples of the drive, passion, and curiosity these students possess. It's a pleasure to be here today to honor them and recognize the immense amount of work that went into each paper. At this point, I'd like to invite each advisor to briefly introduce their advisees and their paper topic. And then after each introduction, I invite each student to briefly describe the paper. And then we'll have questions at the end after each student's had a chance to present. So, I'm sure people will have questions, but we'll save them all to the end. So we'll go ahead and begin with Peter.
Maybe everyone can also mute if you're not going to be speaking.
Yes,
Sure.
thank you.
Good idea.
Yes, so Zoom rules apply.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So I would like to introduce Adelaide Steinfeld. She wrote her senior thesis about, it's a mixture of a chemistry topic and an art history topic. She wrote about some wall paintings in a Mithraeum, which is a religious type of religious sanctuary in Ostia Antiqa, so from the ancient Roman period. And she had the opportunity to do some scientific research with Eleonora de Toledo, and then through the chemistry department had the opportunity to work on this material. Adelaide had two classes with me, a Greek and Roman art class, and also my classical architecture class, where she perhaps presciently wrote about domestic architecture in Ostia for the research paper. So congratulations, Adelaide, and take it away.
So do I speak on my paper now?
What's that?
Oh, do I speak on my paper now?
Yes, please, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this thesis presents on research conducted on the Mithraeum of Lucretius Menander in Ostia Antiqa, Italy, focusing on its painted decoration and the X-ray fluorescence and visual-induced luminescence conducted here, examining how these materials and decorations fit into Mithraic wall painting, as well as painting in 2nd and 3rd century Ostia. The first part of this thesis discusses the history of the ancient city of Ostia as it transformed from military outpost to the main harbor of Rome, while also contextualizing religion in the ancient Roman city. The next section focuses on the cult of Mithras, from the origins of Mithras in the Hindu/Zoroastrian pantheon to the implementation of a Roman cult of Mithras, its rites and rituals, and large geographic spread. The following section discusses the standardization of Mithraea and their decoration to establish context for the Mithraeum of Lucretius Menander. Numerous characteristics are found to be shared between Mithraea, as they generally consist of a long rectangular room entered from the back on one of the short sides, with podia or platforms for dining couches, lining the central aisle leading up to the altar. And then the decoration consisted of wall painting, sculpture or relief, and mosaic, often featuring Mithraic iconography, and is a more variable aspect. The next part of the thesis focuses on the Mithraeum of Lucretius Menander and its wall paintings, by giving a brief overview of the history in the building and its 3 phases of use before detailing the existing decoration. The majority of the remaining decoration comes from its 2nd phase as a residential building, showing broad red frames on a white ground with small central scenes. The only decoration from the Mithraic phase are the painted podia and an altar with an inscription. The following section details the pigment analysis that was conducted on these paintings. This analysis revealed a palette of lime white, green earth, Egyptian blue, yellow ochre, and a red ochre/red lead mix. There is little other pigment analysis of Mithraea, and between 3 analyzed Mithraea, a number of pigments are shared and several are unique. Looking at pigment analysis in Ostia of contemporary buildings, a far more similar palette is seen, and the Mithraeum of Lucretius Menander appears to fit into general trends in artistic materials of the 2nd and 3rd centuries in Ostia. Overall, this research provides a first step in the analysis of pigments used in Ostia, Future research into pigments used in wall paintings of other Mithraean ostia, as well as other contemporary buildings, will be vital in reconstructing the artist's palette. Thank you.
Oh,
So at this point, I'd like to ask Diana Gisolfi to introduce her advisee.
I am delighted to introduce Olivia Cranny, who wrote her thesis on sgravito ceramic wares produced in Venice. I was delighted to have her in 3 courses as my student. Olivia was interested in ceramics even before she came on the Venice program. And she's done courses at Pratt in both art history and science, where she investigated ceramics. She learned of the sgravito technique and found the work of Luigi Conton, she'll tell you about that, who literally unearthed the examples in Venice. During the Venice program, Olivia noticed a small display of wares that were in the basement of the Doge's palace, which led to her research on medieval ceramics during the Venice program. In her thesis, she moved on to work on early Renaissance examples done in Venice, which get a little more interesting, and she will tell you about those. Olivia, I'm honored to introduce you.
Thank you, Deanna. Yeah, I'll try to keep my summary short. In essence, I am just writing very much focusing on the sgraffito wares of Venice, which is a particular ceramic technique. So the technique involves a red iron vessel with a white kaolin slip typically, and a potter would incise with a stylus to remove the slip and therefore create kind of like a negative design on the wares. So it's also somewhat of a low sculpture relief technique as well. So this has been around for quite a while, since the Tang Dynasty in China is where they think it originated, and it slowly made its way across Asia, and the Venetians came in contact with the technique in Byzantium, who were huge trading partners with the Venetians, as we know. And yeah, the Venetians adopted this ware and not only imported Eastern interpretations, but started to make their own. And as Deanna mentioned, they had a very unique relationship with the wares and slowly moved away from the Eastern motifs that are typically avian or have some sort of animal design, sometimes actually apotropaic symbols that were used to protect the food. So they kind of moved away from that, and in the late medieval period and early Renaissance period, started to draw these very charming portraits of Venetian citizens, landscape, even portraits of Dante, who was a famous author, obviously, at the time. So they're very charming. They're very little studied. And as Deanna mentioned, Luigi Conton is essentially the forerunner of the entire study. He's a native Venetian, and in the 1940s approximately, he would go out and actually unearth the wares from the lagoon on his boat, and then write about them. So he was very much conquering the entire field, essentially. And he countered the widely accepted notion taken from Cipriani, Piccolo Pasto Cipriani's text about Venice, that the Venetians did not actually make any of their own pottery until the 16th century. And he found wares that were as early as the 10th century that were made on Venetian soil. So he kind of summarized his work that he brought this like lost legacy back to his city, and he was very proud. So I was really happy to study his work and write my own interpretation of the wares.
Bravo.
Now I'd like to invite Marcia Morton to introduce her advisee, Rachel Kelleher.
Rachel has followed a less conventional path, just as her thesis examines unconventional beauty, in that she'd never taken a course from me when she approached me to be her thesis student. I suspect because Anka is on sabbatical this year. But I have really, really enjoyed working with Rachel. She's been an excellent student, responsive to suggestions, very committed to her topic, and a really hard worker. Her topic really elevates Jane Morris from muse and lover to the role of artist and collaborator. And she really did convincingly connect their alterations and new images of design and beauty and female identity to the emerging aesthetic dress reform movement. As such, her thesis is therefore a fusion of fine arts and design, which of course is one of the primary pedagogical goals of our department, and it's nice to see it represented here. I asked Rachel what she wanted to do next year, or what she would do next year in a perfect world, not the one we're inhabiting. And she said after a gap year, she would love to go to FIT and pursue graduate work on the history and theory of fashion and museum practice, preferably at Fashion Institute of Technology. She has had past internship positions as a fashion and textiles research assistant for the Peabody Essex Museum, and she's been a cataloging intern at the Phillips Library Archive. She also told me that her love of fashion history stemmed from courses here at Pratt that really presented fashion as important indicators of social, political, and economic change. And she said for her, fashion reflects the environment and the communities we interact with. So congratulations, Rachel, fine job.
Thank you so much. So my thesis analyzes Dante Gabriel Rossetti's paintings of Jane Morris and the dynamics of their collaboration within the context of the emerging new dress style movements and the constructions of female identity in Victorian England. Artistic dress, with origins as early as 1846, was seen both as a liberation of the female body from heavy corsetry and a celebration of historical notions of natural beauty, which later helped lay the groundwork and fueled the development of sartorial trends incorporated into aesthetic dress, more popularized and mass-produced in the later half of the 19th century, originating in the 1880s. As Jane was an active participant through the selection and design of dresses featured in the paintings, her role has been noted by historian Jan Marsh. Gabriel valued Jane's contributions and suggestions not merely because of romantic infatuation, but because of their worth. He respected her judgment. The close companionship formed between the pair in the mid-1860s, with closest association during the years of 1867 to 1872, with Jane becoming his principal model and active collaborator. Showing a strong distaste for the unnatural shape of modern costumes, the artists in the PRB circle preferred to depict clothing truer to the female form. The new styles enabled fluid movement and individual expression, emulating that of medieval, Renaissance, and classical dress, with Rossetti acknowledged as a specialist in dress design. The PRB sensibilities were close to that of design reformers, and textiles were often featured prominently in their work, with fluid texture, sensual surfaces, and saturated yet subtle colors, according to historian Stephen Calloway. Designing garments and finding textile props for the portraits was often a cooperative effort between artist, sitter, and friends. And in the painting of Jane, the blue silk dress painted in 1868, letters between her and Rossetti indicate that she was responsible for designing and making the gown. After a dress was utilized as a costume prop for the portrait, it soon became incorporated into the daily wardrobe. Jane and Rossetti's work was thus collaborative, and she was a participant rather than the soulful model of pre-Raphaelite legend. Credit was given for the stitch patterns that were highly sought out after by other PRB members, and Marsh even goes on to note that much of Rossetti's artistic work during their relationship could be a product of her enthusiasm and assistance. Jane's designs were revered for their intricacies and originality, and she went on to patent a number of them. Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to invite Erica Morawski to introduce her advisee, Yesenia Valemora.
Great, thank you, John. So I was never lucky enough to have Yesenia in one of my classes, but did have the fortune of being able to work with her this last semester, and fall semester too, on her thesis, which is on Tiffany lamps. And I would just say she came really a long way in working through this project and focusing in on, I think, what are some really interesting questions that point to important research that need to be done on reevaluating the way we think about Tiffany lamps as industrial design rather than just decorative art objects, and moving us out of the kind of mythic biography of Louis Comfort Tiffany into some more productive terrain. So congratulations, Yesenia, and I'll turn it over to you to talk more about your work.
Thank you. So my thesis focuses on the Tiffany lamp and how we shift the conversation from looking at it as decorative art, because that is limiting and it doesn't acknowledge the innovations that went into the material and the design of the lamps. I began by focusing on the glass material itself. Tiffany hired many chemists and some Venetian glass makers to reformulate glass and to add to change the color from applied color to color within the glass, more of a medieval style. That, of course, was furthered by the fact that new chemistry and new chemicals were added into the glass. So he reformulated the glass and created vibrant colors in Favreau glass, which was the new formulation of glass that mimicked iridescent surface of ancient glass. Then I studied the actual lamp styles, and the invention of electric lighting introduced a problem in many American homes, which in turn influenced the design. A comparison between the early lamp designs and later more refined designs show that the lamps were adapted to solve a problem. By examining the Tiffany lamps in relation to electric lighting, we come to understand the successes of their design and how the iconic Tiffany style lamp came to be. One of the most important things that I found was the perspective of Clara Driscoll. She was one of the most prolific designers employed by Tiffany Studios, and her work really reveals a designer's perspective on the Tiffany lamps. This section in my thesis draws connections between Driscoll's work and that of an industrial designer. Her responsibilities extended beyond motif designs for lampshades to the managing of the lamp making department and consideration of efficient production methods. The production methods then were kept a secret by Tiffany, but we can put them together using Clara Driscoll's own personal letters. The organization of the lamp making department allowed for the quick creation of a wide array of lampshades that differed in complexity and prices. Most lamp designs were mass produced, but the production methods established a system in which the commissioned one-of-a-kind pieces could easily be redesigned for mass production. A mix and match type of approach was both efficient and created products that appeared to be unique. In my conclusion, I analyzed how our understanding of the Tiffany lamp is clouded by Louis Comfort Tiffany's own opinions about what art and what fine art was to him. He never acknowledged the lamps, and he played a very minimal role in their production. He mainly just gave the final approval before production. The lamps didn't coincide with his own aspirations, and he failed to acknowledge their value. And it's through the analysis of these lamps as examples of industrial design and the perspective of designers like Clara Driscoll that we can begin to understand the creative innovations in their design.
So at this point, I'd like to invite Marcia Morton to introduce her advisee, Laura Rique.
I first met Laura in the fall of 2018 when she signed up to take my graduate course, Beginnings of Abstraction. She was only one of 2 undergraduates in the course, and I have to say that both she and I were a little hesitant. She was fairly young at the time, but she did spectacularly well and wrote an impressive research paper on Kandinsky's theories. She subsequently took my course in 19th century German art, and her interest in German culture was also manifested by the fact that she took Anne Schoenfeld's Bauhaus course as well. Her thesis on Schlemmer and androgyny is a surprisingly understudied subject with regard to Schlemmer, but it's definitely in the forefront of current publications on the Bauhaus, which are increasingly looking at images of women, art by women, their position at the Bauhaus, and gender identity altogether. It certainly was an exemplary thesis, and Proof of that is the fact that she submitted an abstract of her thesis for an undergraduate symposium at New Paltz this early spring, which was supposed to have been held in April. Obviously didn't happen, but I believe they are going to publish the papers. But it was very, very competitive. I know that over 100 students applied, and they only took around 20 or 25. So it's quite an accomplishment of Laura's. Laura has a minor in museum and gallery work, and she has had internships this year at the Met, at the Rubin Museum, as well as holding the position of resident director at the Pratt Institute, Residential Life and Housing. She hopes in the future to pursue internships at the Brooklyn Museum when they are, doing them again in person, and continuing ultimately to graduate school. She wrote to me that she hopes to, quote, expand on my exploration of modernist utopian ideals in times of turmoil. So she will adapt some of the conclusions of her thesis to our new and altered world. Congratulations, Laura.
Thank you so much, Professor Morton. So my thesis is entitled Modern Marionettes, the Triadic Ballet and Utopian Androgyny. This paper seeks to explore Bauhaus artist Oskar Schlemmer's fusion of masculinity and femininity in his costumes for the triadic ballet and the utopian goal created by its contradictory elements. Chapter 1 focuses primarily on the history of androgyny in German philosophy and literature, propagated by German art historian Johann Joachim Winckelmann in the 18th century, and then later reformed by the political and social environment of the Weimar Republic that Schlemmer was operating within. This chapter additionally references the conceptions of the body established by Nazarene painters in 19th century Germany, whose androgynous models of the human figure provided a modern alternative to associations with gender from antiquity. Chapter 2 then establishes various Weimar era perspectives of gender and sexuality, specifically the development of the new woman and the new man, to further contextualize the history of androgyny in Germany as it functioned specifically within the Bauhaus. This chapter reveals a modern synthesis of gender that invariably affected Oskar Schlemmer's theoretical motivation and subsequent artistic production. Chapter 2 additionally explores the development of typology and the classification of particular stereotypes in Weimar social sciences and visual arts to argue that Schlemmer adapted a similar approach in his typification of bodily forms for the triadic ballet. The final chapter explores Schlemmer's set of types established in his personal writings to consider how their androgynous forms promoted a Bauhaus goal of utopian regeneration through theater's, quote, promise of total art. This chapter additionally revisits Schlemmer's devotion to a unification of polarities and assesses his personal inclination through Schlemmer's amalgamation of new technologies and mechanization, as well as the natural features and movements of the human body. These modern marionettes, repeatedly generated by Oskar Schlemmer throughout his life, inform research into a synthesis of opposites such as machine and nature, abstraction and figuration, and masculinity and femininity, conflicting dualities that continue to define debates in the sphere of cultural and visual production today. Thank you.
So at this point, I'd like to turn over the opportunity for Agnes to introduce her advisee, June Bendich. June, are you here? Yeah, I don't see her either. Still, we can introduce her work, and if she's able to join us later, then we can rejoin. But let's
we can do that. I really don't like to speak on her behalf. I was trying to reach her on the phone 2 minutes ago and kept texting and emailing her. Something probably came up, but I do have June's poster here, and I'm not sure if you can you see this?
Yes.
Can you see it? Okay, so I'm hoping she will join in. John, please kind of, look out for her. But if not, I would really like you to, to have a chance to see more of this work here, and just a few images at least. So I had met June 3 years ago when she took my Arts in the 60s seminar, and she was an absolutely excellent, very critically minded, deeply curious and very inquisitive person, and she remained so. And when she approached me with the desire to work on initially institutional critique and at the intersection of current political protests. So we started very far from just focusing on decolonized displays. What happened was, for me, a very exciting kind of thought process. From a more historically focused thesis, we realized that because of the limitedness of the 20 page or so, she decided to zoom in on decolonized displays, but still, those of you who had a chance to look into her thesis, you can see that she tried to create a historical and contextual understanding of this protest movement as part, a larger part of institutional critique practices, connecting them to the late 1960s conceptual art practices and, you know, to their expansion in the past 4 decades. She argues for decolonized displays as both institutional critique and performance art. She argues also that for any institutional critique enterprise needs to remain marginal, because as soon as it is co-opted and accepted by the institutions, it loses its political urgency, its immediacy, and its original message. And after these very rich, very briefly done, but very richly argued kind of trains of thoughts, she zoomed in on decolonized displays and the 2019 Whitney Biennial case, which ended the only successful protest movement in the history of American art institutions, which ended with the removal of Warren Kanders from the board of the Whitney Museum, who was and still is the CEO of Safari Land, which is a tear gas manufacturing company, a company whose products, tear gas products, are widely employed by different kind of, you know, military, paramilitary, and other organizations, including the NYPD. And this tear gas also largely contributes to the militarization of borders across the globe. The Kanders case, Kanders removal, led her to the next statement or argument in this brief but really, you know, acutely presented paper, which was to state that although these protest movements often, like the futurists, call for the burn and the closure of museums, but especially in the United States, when museums need private and corporate money, given the scarcity of federal funds, obviously their attempt to close their museums is a faulty one. And instead of closing down museums, what should happen, June argues at the end of her paper, is a thorough reform of the funding of artistic and cultural institutions in the country. Personally, I think we left that in the thesis, that she said that she would like to take Warren Kanders' money and turn it toward more art and more socially and politically minded causes. And she's not here, right? June is not with us, okay. So in this case, I would just say that one of the reasons why I felt very privileged to be privy of this process and have an ongoing conversations about the topic, protest movements, institutional critique, museum funding, performance art, artistic agency, with June throughout the past 3 months, because she shifted her thinking about this greatly. And it was a really beneficial and very exciting for me to see someone writing a thesis, not only just reading and researching, but also keep thinking aloud, keep shifting and weighting arguments. And being privy to this thought process was an absolute privilege, and I am very sad and sorry that she's not here today, because I wish that you should have heard her on this, because it's her work and not mine. That's all. I'm still hoping that she joins in, because she did not respond to my text message, so I don't know what kind of catastrophe is happening there, but hi Olivia, by the way, I just noticed you. So that's it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. If you can return the screen to the non-share mode.
I'm happy to join. I'm sorry I hijacked your screen, but here it is. I'm stop sharing. It's back. Okay.
Perfect. No, this way everybody can see each other's faces as we move to the next phase, which is opening the floor to questions that people might have. So what I'll do is this, we'll go ahead and moderate. If you just simply put your hand up, I'll do my best to call on you so that we're not trying to talk over each other. Once you've been called on, go ahead and turn on your microphone. So Peter.
I would also, in sticking to my 1 minute introduction, I did not include that Adelaide Steinfeld was also accepted to the New Paltz undergrad symposium, and will also have her thesis published as part of that publication. So congratulations to both of you. For a small program, that's a very high level of representation.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
So,
impressive.
other questions? Frima.
Where's from?
I had to unmute myself. I was just really impressed both by the titles before I knew anything about what you were going to say, but also all of your presentations, and that you did original research. Was very clear that it's not just a summary of already worked out ideas, or just rehash of a biography or something like that. And I say that because you're undergraduates, and this was at a very high level, and it was really, you should be congratulated. And if there are any, I think there are some parents involved here, so be very proud of your kids, because they were really terrific. But I have one thing that one is a question, or something that you couldn't do. If you can each of you put up, or in some way show an image of what you were talking about, whether it was the fashion or ceramics, or, just, is it, but even if it's Xerox, but I mean, can you like lift it by your face or something? Or I don't know, but we're all visual people, and it's hard to just take it all in orally. So just to see some of your findings. Is that possible? No?
I see Rachel nodding her head yes, so just go.
Could we show our poster designs?
Oh.
Best. Okay. I could do that if that to start it off.
If a student can take over the screen.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So this was the poster I had designed, just illustrating or quickly summarizing each of the chapters that I had for my thesis. The first one I had was detailing the connections that were formed between the pair. And below you can see a photograph of Jane in one of the dresses she designed that was posed by Rossetti. And in the second chapter, in the celebration of unconventional beauty, I have the portrait that I mentioned previously. That was the first one that he had painted of Jane, and then the blue silk dress that the correspondence between the two detailed that she had a strong influence in the design of and the making of the garment. And in the right panel, I have discussing the third chapter, which is the promotion of artistic dress and its influence on the later aesthetic dress and ideals. And I kind of go into how, like I mentioned before, that artistic dress helped lay the groundwork and fuel sartorial trends in aesthetic dress. And while the two terms artistic and aesthetic dress shouldn't be used interchangeably, much of the stylistic trends carried over. So the handmade gowns transitioned into the aesthetic dress, which was more mass-produced and widely circulated due to the Industrial Revolution's impact.
That's great. That's very helpful.
Excellent. So does anybody else want to put up their poster next? Sure, Adelaide.
If I can put up my poster, I'll share my screen. Can you see that?
Yep.
So this is my poster. And on it, I have images detailing some of the data points. On the right side, there's 2 red data points, just I guess illustrating the 2 different kinds of reds we found in the Mithraeum. The one on the left shows a spectrum that correlates to a red ochre red lead mix, and then the one on the right correlates to just a red ochre pigment. And then my other 2 images are, one's in natural light, and then the other one is in VIL, which shows the presence of Egyptian blue as the pigment fluoresces. And these are just a couple details of the paintings in the Mytharium. So if somebody else wants to go.
Cool. Who else?
That was really fantastic. Did you do the work on site using equipment that you brought with you or with Pratt team?
Yeah, I went with Eleonora to Ostia and we did the research ourselves with the machines from Pratt.
And where's Eleonora? She was here. Now
She should be here.
Oh, there you are.
Just go ahead.
And then Adelaide, could you also say a word about Egyptian blue and what makes it special or interesting as an ancient pigment?
What was the world's first manufactured pigment, and it kind of drops off in use. So a lot of the times we were looking for where it appeared in buildings in Ostia to kind of track when it stopped just appearing in phases and when they stopped using it. And this particular pigment fluoresces under, I think, infrared light. You'd have to ask somebody else for more of the science on that. But with that fluorescence and with a modified camera, you can see where it is on a painting. So it's really cool.
That's cool. Oh, Olivia, can you do it?
Yeah, I'll share my screen and show my poster. Let me do that. All right. Ooh. Everyone can see that, I think.
Yep.
Awesome. So this is my poster. I only have a few of my figures. I think I had I don't even know, 15 in my essay, but I chose some of the ones that I thought best, kind of showed my thought process here. So this first figure has an avian figure on it, and it's from the Benaki Museum in Athens, which I was lucky enough to visit in the summer of 2018. So all of these pictures, except for 2, are actually taken by myself, which is great. The second image is a Venetian example of a ware that Canton dug up himself, dated approximately to the 13th century. This avian ware is from the 12th century, and it's Greek. This is Venetian, and it's from the 13th century. And this is a similar theme to the Eastern motifs. And then here, this portrait of a woman on the third example is where the Venetians start to have a very unique style. This is one of the many portrait plates, and it is from the Museum of Ceramics in Faenza, which I also was lucky enough to visit in 2018, and I took that image. That one is about the 16th century, so 1500s. And then lastly, this vessel is another Venetian example from Canton's text, and it doesn't have a date, unfortunately.
That's great. That last one was the latest one, Olivia?
That last plate is unfortunately not dated in his.
Right, said that. Would you guess it was the latest?
No, I'd guess that the portrait plate was the latest.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Of course.
So would any of our other presenters like to share their screens? Sure, Laura.
I can go ahead. So everyone can see all right? Hold on, let's zoom out. So this is my poster for my paper, and I reduced it to only 5 images, which again doesn't really lend itself to the scope of the project. But over here on the left, this is an image from the premiere of the Triadic Ballet in 1922. So as you can see, it is a bit small, but you can see that sort of unification of both more mechanical, utopian material. There's a lot of steel and metal, but also some more organic forms, but ultimately all female, male anatomy is completely obscured. The gender is not obvious just from looking at the costumes, because as Schlemmer intended, any particular idiosyncrasies were sort of diminished to, again, create this more universal presentation of body. And then over here for my second chapter, I included 2 images from the movement of new objectivity. So on the left is Otto Dix's portrait of the journalist Sylvia von Harden, who represents the new woman. And on the right is Antoine Raderscheid's painting, Young Man with Yellow Gloves from 1921, which is meant to represent the new man. And both differ, but the new woman is meant to be this androgynous, more male sort of presenting form, where the new man is sort of a result of the Second World War and the First World War, excuse me, and this sort of mechanized, very formal, stoic, almost robotic figure. And for my final chapter, I included Oskar Schlemmer's one of his latest works from 1932, the Bauhaus Staircase, which I'm sure we all recognize from MoMA, to sort of lend itself to how his figural anatomy continued to define his work even outside of the ballet. This very defined form, which again sort of prides itself on androgyny and again not being able to distinguish one's gender from looking at the form, but this sort of very utopian, very streamlined geometry that, you know, continues to inform his work even after the ballet.
If I could jump in, one of Laura's most interesting illustrations in her thesis were drawings by Schlemmer for the Triadic Ballet, where he would literally simplify a female and a male form and then superimpose them. So you can really see taking place this fusion of both, there it is, fusion of both of the genders, which she discussed at some length in her thesis.
Interesting.
So Eugenia?
Can everybody see okay?
Yep.
So I didn't include very many images, but the main two images that I did include are two of my most important points. The electric lighting here in this section, I compared two of the models. The one on the left is the older model. It used Favreau glass, which was that iridescent glass made to mimic ancient glass, and blown glass in a cage technique. And that was to hold the gas fuel source for the lamps. Part of the addition of electric lighting is electric lighting was a lot more powerful. In this design here, we have actual like manipulation and an interest in playing with light and how it reflects. The individual bulbs of electric light are included in the tulips at the top, and it's dispersed with the leaded glass and reflected on the mosaic at the bottom. The next image here are three images comparing the similar design of the dragonfly lamp. The dragonfly lamp is one of Clara Driscoll's creations. It's actually the only design that was ever sourced, and she was given credit for it even at the time. It's the same design, they just changed the colors and they changed the bases, which aren't seen in these images because I focused on the shades, but it represents her work and the production method and how it was organized to include one main design and then do very small shifts within the design to make each a unique product. And I also included other sections of my paper here, but those were the two main ones that I wanted to emphasize.
Great, fantastic. So are there any questions, Lisa?
I'd love to. On those lamps, are they signed at all? Do we have knowledge of the authorship of Driscoll for those particular lamps, or were you going based on a more broad interpretation?
The lamps are stamped with Tiffany Studios because they are Tiffany Studio products. So everything was under his name. She was actually mentioned in an article at the time. When the dragonfly design really became popular, they mentioned that it was her design. And it was only once and it was very brief, but it was enough to get some interest in who she was.
Thank you.
Other questions? Anka.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
My question is, again, for all of you, and it doesn't have to do so much with research. but more with what you think you've learned out of the research process per se. I'm curious because I had a student last year whose remarks at the end were that she's found the process very helpful and fulfilling, but crazy, and that she wouldn't go through it all over again, knowing what research actually entails. So I'm curious, how did it feel? Would you mind sharing any thoughts?
Well, I'll go first just because I'm already unmuted, but I think I really enjoyed the process. It was, as you find new things to look at, your entire perspective changes, and what I ended up at the end is completely different from my thoughts in the beginning, and so I really enjoyed the process.
I'll answer that quickly too. I started this paper, like I mentioned, 2018 in Venice, so it was great to return to it as a more experienced student. I think I did get a lot of the basis research done, and it was a fun thing to explore as a long-term project, essentially.
I'll go next. I thought it was really rewarding to go through and analyze my data and kind of piece together this whole data set that I'd had from working on this project, and to have so much time to work through it, to analyze and figure out which pigments were which. And just, it was a really rewarding project overall to be a part of.
Through the research, similar to what Yesenia said, just it was a good exercising and evolving like our paper topic to like its first iteration after finding like new scholarship, like so you would transition from what like your preconceived ideas were and to the final product. And I hope to like continue on with this in the future.
Yeah, I definitely echo what everyone has said. I feel particularly lucky in mine because I really do feel like it's a synthesis of all of the work I've been building up to prior to this. As Professor Morton said, with the Bauhaus class and then the 19th century German art class, those two were really crucial in the research I was doing. And I was really excited to find those moments be injected throughout the paper, specifically being able to talk about the Nazarene movement was something that I was surprised by, but delighted to be able to discuss and sort of weave in that 19th century theory into something much more modernist. So again, it's been a really rewarding process and has been cool to see something very concrete come out of the past 4 years.
Well, are there, we've got time for one more question if anybody has one. Certainly it's open up to students as well. If students would like to ask each other questions, please feel free to.
I have a general question for all of the students, maybe. Just where do you go from here? I know it's a very weird time and it's very hard to think about where you go from here. But in a better world, I think Marcia mentioned that earlier, where would you want to go next? Or has even just this experience now changed your ideas? It's a big question, but quick thoughts. Are you thinking graduate school? Laura, yes.
Yeah, I mean, as Professor Morton said, hopefully I'd like to continue this sort of deep dive into modernism and utopian ideals, specifically in the Weimar Republic. I do think it's an interesting period, and while it does have a lot of scholarship already on it, I'd be interested in sort of diving more into the gender and sexuality of the era and how the art is reflective of that. So hoping to go to grad school maybe in fall of 2021. I'm looking at the Courtauld Institute in London because they do have a lot of these special topics offered. But yeah, that would be ideal, but I'm sure everyone else feels the same. We will just have to see where the world takes us in the next few months.
In some of these wonderful mix of topics, I just want to congratulate you all. Just a wonderful richness and variety of topics. And in some cases, I wonder if you're thinking of going forward in art history or in something adjacent to art history, like archaeology or conservation science. In a couple of cases, they're quite scientific, or wide open question.
As Professor Morton mentioned, I'm hoping to go into collections management for fashion and textiles. So if archives and these spaces are open, hopefully in the semi-future, I would hope to visit some, like the Victorian Albert, the Cloth Worker Center is an excellent resource I hope to return to.
True.
So
If
I
I
guess,
could jump in here before for more students, it's we owe it to Rachel that we're here today doing this, and the posters. She wrote to me and said just a week ago and said, "So what's happening? Are we going to do anything?" And I wrote to John, and the whole thing, project sort of snowballed. So hats off to Rachel.
Good for all of you.
I just wanted to also congratulate everyone and say that how impressed I am, because although there is only one contemporary topic, but I was really kind of amazed that every single thing you did had a lot of resonance to contemporary life, whether it is gender relations in Weimar Republic and fluidity, whether it is fashion and industrial design, and current crossovers between those and contemporary art practice are very prevalent, whether it is global trade practices and this graffiti in Venice and the Eastern kind of, roots, or material art history and archaeology kind of reinvented through pigment analysis. I'm just absolutely kind of, flabbergasted and, very, I'm not your mother, I'm not your teacher, but some of you were my students, but I just wanted to congratulate everyone, because the depth and the breadth of the topics and, the scholarship in it is really impressive. So everyone should be walking very tall. And it's very unfortunate that we have to do this through Zoom. It would be much nicer to have some crudité and celebrate you in a room, but that couldn't happen. So thank you.
so at this point, I want to be mindful of everybody's time and Zoom fatigue and start wrapping things up. I want to thank, of course, all the students for their very hard work and for putting together such great posters and audios, for the passion that it took to carry these projects to their completion. I want to echo Marcia's thanks to Rachel for lighting the fire that brought us here for this, and to just congratulate you all on a job well done. I also want to thank the advisors. So Marcia and Peter and Diana and Erica and Agnes, for the incredible amount of work it takes to help guide and shape a thesis, and to all the care that was given throughout this process to your students. You've all done the department proud, and I wish you all the best going forward, the best for the rest of the semester. And when it's all said and done, take a moment to just truly, fully relax, because you've all earned it. So at this point, we'll bring the event to a close. Thank you all very much for coming. And again, my hat is off to you all.